Well, I thought I'd finished, but here I am again. And this is because my husband came down with this paper that I wrote. Now, this was written at Glacier View, and it's called Glacier View, My View. And I have no memory of it whatsoever. It's more positive than the meetings that I've taken. So it's interesting. And it also deals with some things that happened early in the week. Again, from my perspective. We went on the committees. Sunday, the 10th of August 1980, written Tuesday the 12th. Just a note on the third day of the meetings. I should say that this was written to Marie Webber, who was our neighbour at PUC. Now, there are some mentions of Bob Brinsmead in here, but this is because Marie was a Brinsmeadite. She came to understand the gospel through Bob Brinsmead, and I also mentioned Herschel and Trudy Lamp, and they were very much followers of Bob Brinsmead. So that will explain some of the things I say. Marie just died this last year, I think. She was in her 90s. Great lady. We arrived Sunday at dinner time and got settled in. Soon met Norm Young and had a delightful reunion. Of course, we had a lot to talk about. He's a great person, even though he's only spoken once in the meetings. He's made quite an impression. We are glad that America can meet him. Things are only just warming up. Sunday night was an introductory meeting. Neil Wilson was remarkable in how he handled it, though he made a supportive speech about the Review and Herald and its right to present traditional Adventism, which I wish he hadn't. Des is not actually on the committees. We found that out when Neil Wilson spoke on Sunday night. He is not part of the morning study groups, and these consist of 10 to 12 or possibly more people per group. These go for 3.5 hours every morning discussing assigned topics, and in the afternoon they make reports. People chosen by the group speak. Erwin Gain is one of the leaders. Elder Hackett is another. Herb Douglas is another. You can imagine the slant of the reports in the first half of the afternoon meetings. The first half yesterday afternoon was extremely discouraging. Des did not speak since the group was told on Sunday that his paper was his defence. He can only clarify misrepresentations of his views or answer questions. However bad all this may sound, the scholars do mainly agree about the problems, though their answers may vary. And Des being quiet is good in that the scholars will have to speak up. If Des did the talking, they wouldn't bother. The second half of the afternoon meeting was better. Dr. Hamill made a brave speech or two about his recognition of problems. Fred Veltman also made quite a brave speech, though he is harder to follow. And then others, including Norman, spoke. Norm was tremendous, very succinct and clear. Neil Wilson was quick to see that what these men were saying, this is on the Tuesday, was not what the report said. I think things will quickly improve. Neil Wilson has given immunity to the whole group and told them to be honest. In the second half of Monday afternoon meeting yesterday, there were some emotional appeals by Leslie Harding and Elder Odom. Elder Pearson is not here because of his heart. Neither is Harry Lowe or Figure. Tom Blinko from Andrews got sick, heart problems, was taken to hospital and returned home. Our son Luke has been sick on and off. The 9,000 feet altitude affects him. Monday, the 11th, August 1980. So I've gone back from Tuesday. Last night, Bill Shea presented his paper on Daniel. It was entertaining to see the reactions of the scholars at the back. Shea says a lot of things which other scholars violently disagree with. However, the administration loves it. You, Marie, no doubt will find this depressing, but the last half of the afternoon meeting did begin a change, and I think that things will be different from now on. Though Ray Cottrell, who's been through this all before, says it's always been like this, and he is very downcast. Dr. Heppenstall has approached Neil Wilson for Des to be allowed to make a presentation sometime, and I think he will be. Again, it's good that Des isn't speaking, the others have to, or they will eventually reap the same condemnation as Des. They are aware of it, and are feeling somewhat insecure. I didn't tell you that Neil Wilson said in the Sunday meeting he wanted a consensus of agreement at the end of the week, and not just a majority vote. I don't know how that can come about unless they all agree with the review. I can never tell where Neil Wilson stands. He can support the review while encouraging the scholars, but he is handling the affair magnificently. Very capable, very intelligent, and he doesn't miss a trick. Dr. Larendel has had a few chats with us. To him, Des's paper was a shocker. He didn't know about Hebrews 9, he said, but he agrees. Not sure yet about Daniel 8, but he's going to keep studying it. He has Bob Brinsmead's manuscript, this would be 1844, re-examined. He has not read it yet. He sees the threat of job loss if Des loses his, as do others. There are many really fine people here, a privilege to meet them. Surely good will come from it. I rescued a rather mauled chipmunk from a cat this morning, carried it several hundred yards, and then it ran off. Found out afterwards you can get rabies from them if they bite you. Ha ha, other way around. If you bite them. Ha ha, other way around. They are so delightful to watch. I wish I could do something about the cat, since he apparently does this quite often. Des's courage is in the right place. He feels fairly optimistic that things will improve. Tuesday, the 11th of August, 1980. I am writing this in a very subdued light, late at night. I hope it will be visible and legible by day. This is still Tuesday. I told you how well things were going till the last half of the afternoon meeting. For the first time, Luke came with me to the second half, that is, since reports are read in the first half and are not too interesting for a 14-year-old. However, Des was asked to answer questions from 5 to 6. Up till then, things were going well, though I felt the people who spoke up, some of them at least, knew less than the ones who didn't. This is always a problem. There was progress. The reports were not typically traditional in the first afternoon meeting, and many felt encouraged. When Des got up to speak, he intended to be undogmatic and slow of speech. But as often happens, he got absorbed and the speed quickened. Things went well at first, but later Dr. Heppenstall got up and made an impassioned speech similar to one made in private on Sunday, I believe, pleading with Des to see 1844 in Daniel 7, i.e. the investigative judgment. Des could not, and said he could not accept our traditional motif. It got very intense, and Neil Wilson at the end said to Des that he never listens to the counsel of the brethren, and that if the consensus went against him, he would have to pocket his views. It was all very dramatic. Des said he would listen. But Des, I didn't put this in. Des did pick up his notes and walk off. He wasn't happy with Neil Wilson because, I wasn't going to ad-lib, because he felt that Neil Wilson was taking an opportunity to have a go at him personally because of what Heppenstall said. And I should say that people thought that Heppenstall were against Des at least part of the time, but when Heppenstall found out after this is at Glacier View, but when Heppenstall found out afterwards that Des had been fired, he was furious. Anyway, also Heppenstall had the beginning of dementia, probably at Glacier View, because he had problems for years. His wife used to write to us about it. So he really wasn't against Des. We visited their home afterwards and we were very good friends. And we've got a letter from him in his own handwriting saying when he read the Glacier View manuscript that he agreed with it down the line. So I don't know what to say other than that. The impression Des got, and so did I, was that Des would not have to pocket his views but change them. Dr. Hamill explained later that was not what Neil Wilson meant. However, another aside, that's exactly what they said in the Friday afternoon. It was a very emotional event, as made a tremendous impression here. The scholars were very shaken. The others, I guess, are more convinced than ever that Des is a heretic. There is a great gap fixed between most of the administration and the scholars. The scholars, I'm not talking about Gerhard Hazel, the right-wing scholars. I'm talking about people like Bill Johnson, Fritz Guy, James Londis, and there's a lot of others. They agreed with Des's main points, the informed ones, even if they didn't agree with the finer points. So they saw the problems, they didn't always agree with Des's solutions. The scholars have been very sympathetic, very warm to us, especially since yesterday. They say that if Des goes, most scholars will have to too. But of course, they didn't, most of them. The way Heppenstall asked the question about 1844, was there any change in heaven about the ministry of Christ then? And Des could not say yes. As another aside, and I may go back and look at this because I hadn't thought of it, in the book, The Adventist of Christ's Identity, where I wrote 1 or 2 chapters, and I haven't looked at that to do this, I know that Heppenstall wrote to me and said that I'd got something wrong, but I don't have that letter, and I don't know exactly what it was that I said wrong. It's very hard to be accurate about history because personal bias comes into it so much, and you don't hear everybody else's story of what's going on. People go in with biases. You can only do your best. And as I say, I'm giving you my opinion, and other people may disagree. But if you read Milton's book and you read Ray Cottrell's book, you know, you don't have to just depend on what I say. Jim Cox was in tears about it. He is being a good friend. I think the emotion with which Heppenstall spoke, saying that if 1844 drops out of biblical exegesis, we have nothing left, and pleading for Des to accept his view, put Des in a very difficult and emotional situation. Because he loved Heppenstall, and this led to what followed. The confrontation was a crisis, but maybe God will bring good out of it and use the scholars to somehow redeem the situation. I think next week, when the scholars and administrators meet to try and get together, without the emotion of this week, things may improve. However, I really wonder if there can be a change. They keep trotting out the Ellen White statement about the shaking. Now, that's a misleading statement. It's been said to me in private, not publicly. I'm about to ring Dean Jennings, and so we'll close. God bless. Wednesday, August the 13th, 1980. Dear Marie, I rang Dean Jennings today. No doubt he will have contacted you, both Marie and Dean were close neighbours at PUC. I posted a letter to you this morning. I noticed it has gone from the post tray. Maybe you could collect these letters, Xerox them for Calvin Edwards and Bob Parr. But please, no more, meaning don't send them to any more. I will try and remember to give you their addresses. And she kept them for me, which is why I could type them out. I do remember that. I am in the first afternoon meeting hearing reports on Hebrews. They again were a mixture, not very good, but I don't know enough about the technical details. Norman is working at the moment on a project of critiquing Des's paper. He hadn't recovered from yesterday's drama, which was hard on him, when Neil Wilson asked him to be one of a group to write a paper on Des's manuscript. So that says it was Tuesday when Norman was asked to help write up the 10-point statement. A black African worker, I wish I could remember his name, was a marvellous man, spoke to me before coming here to this particular meeting to say he knows a lot of scholars agree with Des, but they are not speaking up. They do not think the church is yet ready for the sort of revelations necessary. He said he can no longer believe in 1844, the investigative judgment, or the traditional view of Ellen White. He said he has been recently 4 years at Andrews, was there when we went in November, and said the teachers do not use Ellen White except Larendel. Dedran has one class on her in the quarter he attended, i.e. on lecture. He does not use her anymore. This is Dedran. This black gentleman said that even when the class outline included 1844 in the investigative judgment, it was not taught. They put it at the end of the course and got behind with the outline program, so didn't have to teach it. Now, isn't that an eye-opener? That's exactly what Des said. This is a very fine man, and I can vouch for the accuracy of his opinion. He's a very fine, intelligent person. He said if Des could only hang on, he felt that in 2 or 3 years the tide would radically turn. He is aware of others who feel the same way. He said he could no longer teach tradition unless specifically asked for the church position, that he would at the same time present his own view and tell them to study it for themselves. Dr. Heppenstall is answering questions on the sanctuary at the moment. By the way, the other people on Des's paper, i.e. the paper showing where Des's view differs from the traditional view, are Bob Spangler, Raoul Dedran, Herbert Douglas, who will be most critical of Des, Arthur Furch, James Londis, and Norman. I have found Norman to be a real friend. I have to appreciate him so much. He has a breadth of understanding which amazes me. The spirit here is really good, some really wonderful people. One can feel the sympathy and fellowship. I am now writing after tea. Des just had a session and it went off unemotionally, unlike yesterday, and I think very well. He's had a lot of counsel to bend as far backwards as he could to be conciliatory. Elder Parmenter made a very supporting statement, though he is still very concerned about Des's ideas. He and Wilson said it is not enough to say one will keep silent. One must affirm the basic beliefs of the church. Des pointed out that this was difficult to measure, since many views in our published works vary considerably from the basic statement of beliefs, i.e. the SDA commentary. Marie, I can hear you say, what about truth? But the wheels can only travel slowly. One can see it here. Good will come of it, I'm sure. There have been some quite progressive strides. Written on Thursday about Wednesday. Elder Parmenter spoke very nicely of the support he has for Des. He holds him in high honour and was grateful for his gospel emphasis. He spoke of the pastoral problem in Australia, of people who will hold back tithes from the church if traditional Adventism is not taught. Well, we know there's another side to this. Many will withhold tithe if traditional Adventism is taught. I can't say enough about the friendship, love and genuine concern expressed here by many. There were more than a few men who wept after the Tuesday meeting, but it seems to have turned for the better. Today is slated for discussion on Ellen White, and this will be the bottom line. Arthur White is here, and after 2 papers on Ballinger, both good, he gave a talk. We left halfway through as it was late. He apparently challenged us on Ellen White in his paper. A good old man, getting very old and frail, but still able to think and speak well. So far, Marie, things look better, but I wonder if RDB will be satisfied. I'm sure he won't. I know the Lamps won't be. So I'm talking to Brinsmead followers about this. It doesn't imply that I was in contact with Bob. Des said to me this morning that the only reason he is enduring this, and he means endurance, I assure you, is that he feels he must bend backwards to do what he can because so many others would be affected. Norman talked to me about gospel Pharisees, many of whom he has met in Australia, who are so militant that they negate any good the gospel might do for others. He talked of the Mrs. Joneses who can't follow the issues and think they should be loyal to the pastor. An aside, Norman was one of these who thinks you can't speak to old ladies, and I resent that. I'm an old lady. On the other hand, I think many lay people can understand these issues, and I understand their frustrations. You will understand, Marie, much is missing, no time to write more. Friday the 15th, 1980. Dear Marie, today is the last day, and one in which the final decision will be made. I rang Dean Jennings last night and told him that while there was still hope, it seemed only little. Thursday the 14th, things went very well in the morning groups discussing Ellen White. The group reports, about 8 of them, were very good. Des could go down the line almost 100%. In the afternoon, a question was raised on the trumpets in great controversy by Beatrice Neal, who is a Bible teacher at Union College, Nebraska. She said she could not believe that this was an exegesis of Revelation, and how could she handle this, what seemed an error? Both Bob Olson and Arthur White gave good answers, and Bertoloviak and myself felt that a real breakthrough would come. They said in essence that it was Josiah Litch's prediction, not necessarily John's in Revelation. They could see it as a historical illustration and not exegesis. The principle could have been built on to make great advances. However, shortly afterwards in the Thursday afternoon, Elder Walter Blem of California got up and gave a very emotional speech about how his field was divided, the schools, the churches. He said he has ministers teaching things which are not fundamental Adventism. Before this meeting, Elder Franz read out an emotional and loaded letter from Elder Pearson against Des's manuscript, saying it knocks out the props of Adventism. He listed them. Said it taught Calvinist predestination, once saved, always saved. Doesn't teach sanctification, the new birth, etc. It got a lot of amens. You can imagine the emotion that both of these presentations made. I believe, or I heard, the administration did not want to read the letter out, but felt they could not do it since he, Pearson, was a recent General Conference president. However, looking back, I think they read it out intentionally. But of course it was read without comment and defence. Also, an elder Cherian of India made a speech saying Des's paper troubled him, and he reaffirmed faith in Ellen White. So did another president. So it ended up with the point that Beatrice Neal had made about the trumpets and great controversy being lost. Finally, several people started to talk about procedure with Des and his views, and the tension built up. In the end, Elder Parmenter said there would have to be positive affirmation on Des's part because of the pastoral problems in the church. This is a rough idea of what he said. Therefore, we took it to mean that Des must preach the consensus statement of the group. Before this was said, Dr. Hamill asked Des if he thought he could accept the church's decision, e.g. on Hebrews 9:8, where he and Des don't agree, on the church's decision on fundamental ideas. Des said he had given room to vote both views in his paper. At the end, Parmenter said that those who can't preach the fundamentals should, without being asked, hand in their credentials. We and a lot of others came out of the meeting without much hope. Hamill had said they would not make Des go against his convictions, but really, we wonder. I don't think I mentioned, but it looks like I won't mention again because I thought of his name and now I've forgotten it. But the ethics man from Loma Linda, who some of you would know, he stood up and talked to Parmenter and said that he believed the same as Des. He was the only one really brave enough to say it in public. And this is the response he got from Parmenter. I'll probably think of his name later, but very famous scholar. He's now gone, but he taught medical ethics at Loma Linda. Friday, we are in a meeting where they are going over a questionnaire. They had one at the beginning of the week and repeated it, sort of a secret ballot. We hope for some improvement. There were 20 questions in Daniel, the sanctuary, etc. The brethren said the results were worse rather than better. Now they are going over the rough draft of a statement coming out from this group. It is fairly good. This is the consensus statements. Des feels it's much more advanced than what has come out before. Duncan, Eva, Bill Johnson and Fritz Guy wrote it up, and it is much better than the questionnaire. Back to Thursday night. I will just recount a couple of things, maybe just one. I talked to Duncan Eva last night at about 10:30 p.m. I think he, Fritz Guy, Bill Johnson and maybe others were up all night. There is no doubt as to the dedication, love, etc. of many of these men. It's going to be a tragedy of administration to give Des an ultimatum that he cannot conscientiously abide by. In talking to Duncan Eva, among other things, I talked to him about RDB because I sense, though Bob's name has not come up much, that this will be the bottom line. I told him I thought Des would be expected to oppose him and that I knew that Des would not. Duncan Eva indicated this would be so. I talked to him frankly about Bob's book and told him that though we felt it would make administration's hair fall out and could have been much more conciliatory, it did express the gap between legalistic traditional Adventism and new so-called Adventism, and that if I had to accept Pearson's views of Adventism, I wanted no part of the church. Frankly, Marie, I think this will end up the bottom line for us. I feel fairly sure there is little hope. By the way, Des slept better last night than for ages. Maybe it was thinking that the tension may soon be over. However, if the statement of doctrine which will come out is definitely in advance, of what's come out before. I had heard that the church expects to lose about 60,000 members over this. We personally hope if it comes to it, people will not act precipitously and separate from the church. That figure I got from Elder Hamill, and of course they were using Ellen White's statement about the omega of apostasy. course, Dr. Hamill in later years wrote his regrets about Glacier View. He was a fine scholar. He was just busy administering, and when he actually studied the issues, he had some regrets about his part in Glacier View. But he said to me, "We expect to lose about 60,000 people, and we don't want them." And I remember at the time I was shocked that you could be so uncaring about people. Well, this afternoon, Friday, we will meet with the brethren. I didn't want to be there, but I was invited, and Des said I must go. They were going to give us something in writing. We must think of it over the weekend, but we've said we will answer today. God bless for now. Friday, Sabbath, Sunday. Dear Marie, well, we are all three on the plane to Washington, and what a week. I've had no time to write before, and the last days were packed. I think I told you about Thursday in the last letter. On Friday morning, no groups met, as it was the day for consensus reports. Some of the men, Duncan Eva, Bill Johnson, Fritz Guy, and Dick Lesher, worked on the consensus statements of this group's position that was given each morning. I think that Bill wrote it up. Then there was one on Ellen White. These were presented to the group and gone through page by page until all were satisfied. The first statement especially did make some advance in thought. The definition of Nitzdark was correct. It was the little horn which defiled the sanctuary, and the sins of the saints didn't defile the heavenly sanctuary. It also said within the veil was the second veil, and said the year-day principle was not explicitly taught in the Bible. Des was very pleased with this. He said he could live with this statement and preach it apart from minor details. It is not perfect, but I think none of us expected it to be. The community can only move slowly. Then Norman, Arthur Furch, Bob Spangler Dedron, Herb Douglas, Jim Londas, that's the 6, had over the previous few days worked on the paper refuting Des. From what Norman said in the 2010 consensus statement, he only contributed to 1 point out of the 10. Norman, I might add, has been a great friend to us here. Everybody came to love him, especially the scholars, and he appreciated them. He was not altogether happy with his 10-point paper. For speed, I will refer to the consensus as CS, and the 10-point refutation paper is 10p. We were asked on Friday morning to leave while this was being read out. It was gone over very quickly as they ran out of time. This paper, 10p, had different people's contributions. Norm did not want to be on it, but Neil Wilson asked him to. He did not agree with everything. It was only a shorter paper saying we do not agree with this or that, no evidence. For instance, they felt Des had pulled various statements out of context, but no evidence was given. When I finally read it on Sabbath, I laughed because 2 or 3 points were at odds with the consensus statements. I don't think administration realised this. They did have a second questionnaire on Thursday, which was actually worse, i.e. more traditional than the first. But some scholars felt the questions were often poorly phrased. In saying this, I don't want to give the impression that the group was a bunch of idiots. A lot of learning came from this meeting. It was a very educational experience, and many said this must happen regularly, and Neil Wilson agreed. They must not let a crisis find them unprepared again. We met with the brethren at 4 p.m. Friday. Maybe I should say a few things to make a background. The scholars were fairly critical, though quite a few agreed with Des on the big ideas. Being scholars, they took that fact for granted, and it appeared to the administration that they were negative to Des's paper. A scholar always questions and criticises, but administrators don't know how to understand this. It's all or nothing. Also found out that Dr. Heppenstall walked out when Des spoke on the Thursday. Des did come over dogmatic, and some scholars felt he was aloof from them. But I pointed out to Jim Cox and others, it's all right for you fellows, mainly sitting back and enjoying the break. Des had enough people after him to counsel, etc., individually to sink the Queen Mary. He was tired all the time, and though by nature a bit aloof, he did not have the energy to cope with it. Also, the question period was a mistake. Though well-intentioned, Des was asked rather baited and direct questions. He spoke too long, but he said later he did it to avoid being asked too many questions. Anyway, I think Heppenstall was not happy that Des would not take his advice on 1844. He meant well, Heppenstall, and invited us to his home in Carmel. And I mentioned that I don't have the letter now, but after Glacier View, when I wrote some things in our book, The Crisis of Spiritual Identity, that Heppenstall wrote and said I got something wrong, and I can't remember what it was. But I misrepresented him. So I'm sorry about that, but I don't know now, or I didn't understand then or now what I did. So now to the meeting. I was asked to go but didn't want to. They felt I should. But though I felt all right before, I was overwhelmed when we went into the room and had to leave. I went and had a rest for about an hour and thought afterwards I should get up the courage and go even if I cried. The men were Keith Parmenter, Australia, Neil Wilson, Elder Bradford, Duncan Eva, Elder Hirsch, Arthur Duffy, Australia, Ralph Thompson and Elder Wernick, almost Bob Spangler. I don't think there was anyone else like this. I don't know quite what that means, but anyway, this was on the third floor of the lounge. Now, I've got a picture. I'll put it right up to the camera. I don't know whether you'll be able to read it. Oh, of course, it's backwards. Anyway, I shall retype this because it's got some typos in it and make it available. I'll send it to Avondale Archives. But it was Bob Spangler, Duncan Eva, other way around. No, I'll do it this way because it's Bob Spangler, Duncan Eva, Elder Bradford, Keith Parmenter, Neil Wilson, Arthur Duffy, Elder Wernick, Ralph Thompson, me and Des. That should come out right. Anyway, the main thrust of the meeting was to go through the consensus statement. And the first part of the meeting, when I was absent, was a statement about Des's attitude, dogmatic, unyielding, etc. Des's judgment was poor in taking the forum meeting on October 27, 1979. Des should have called the tapes in. Bob Brinsmead had sent 50,000 tapes of that forum meeting all over the world. Now, this was written at the time of Glacier View, and I've got the figure of 50,000. And I got that from Des. And Des should have rebuked Brinsmead. The scholars did not agree with Des's theology. They talked about factions, etc. Des said he wouldn't rebuke Bob officially. They discussed his writing something in the review against Brinsmead. Des was asked about the E.G.W. Ballinger statements. Couldn't Des see his paper as a fulfilment of this? Des said that Ellen White saw what Kellogg taught 2 years previously was about to be repeated in Ballinger. They asked Des what he thought of the consensus statement. Des said he could live with it and preach it. This they couldn't understand. They saw Des's paper and the consensus statement separated by an impassable gulf. Elder Wernick asked, did Des think that the consensus statement was a move towards Des's position? And when he said yes, when Des said yes, Elder Wilson said, if I'd known that, Elder Wernick said, if I'd known that, I'd have voted against it. Neil Wilson said the consensus of the group was against Des, including the scholars. They didn't get it. That was an aside. Because these notes were written the next day, I think, I said. No, on the plane on the way home. So they're really quite fresh in our memories. We did write notes after the meeting, and I've mentioned that they are in Avondale archives. Then Keith Parmenter read a drafted letter with 4 statements at the end, which Des must affirm. 2 were okay, I think. One was about RDB, the other that he must declare publicly that he was in error and publicly teach the consensus statement. This was only the first draft. It would have to go to the committee. We would have to apply in writing for it to be final. They gave us time, but we prayed that the Lord would make it clear what we should do. We felt there was no choice. Des could not change his mind and affirm what he did not believe. Des said, do you want me to lie? And Keith Parmenter said, no, but if you could not affirm, he, Keith Parmenter, should not have to ask Des for his credentials. Des should hand them over. So Des said that he had no choice but to say he could not make an affirmation to these conditions. Then Keith Parmenter said, don't feel you may be left high and dry. We will make sure you don't lack bread and water. So I thought Des had been fired, but it had to go through due process. And Keith Parmenter didn't want to face people outside. And because I spoke about it, when at the meeting, Fred Veltman asked me what happened, and I said, they fired Des. And of course it got around, and Parmenter got into hot water, and he told me off for saying it. But as mentioned elsewhere, he came up to us afterwards and sort of jokingly said, I'd give you a job in the SHF, but I know that it wouldn't suit you. So, what would you think? Bold reporting of the fact doesn't do justice to the kindness of these men. With their viewpoint and administrative mentality, they had to do what was best for the flock in their thinking. And of course, we should have had Bob Parr here all along to kick Des under the chair. But Des did go as far as he felt he could. He said he would not preach on the topic. He could cooperate with the brethren to make a unity statement and admit that October the 27th may have been unwise. Note the may, but it wasn't enough. There are a few things I wanted to say, but I was upset. More than the tension of the thought of the situation rather than the situation itself. I wanted to speak once, but it took so long I lost courage. But after the reading of the letter I did have my say, though I cried so much I could hardly speak. About the scholars, what they said to us was different than what the administration heard, apart from Gerhard Hasel and Bill Shea. I mentioned that the former was thought of as an excellent exegete, but he exegeted the party line, and some of Bill Shea's materials was ridiculed by other scholars. Many of the scholars agreed with the major ideas in Des's paper. They again denied this. Well, see, that's the bit that I recorded that I said that wasn't in Spangler's notes. So together, as I say, I'm quite proud that I said something. Arthur Duffy was quite overcome. It was an emotional event, as you can imagine. Then we left, and I went and rang Noel Mason sometime later, and I said, Des has lost his job. You're kidding, he said. I did say Des has lost his credentials. Well, it wasn't technically true, but the decision was final. It was only a matter of redrafting the letter from Keith Parmenter and our response. Des did go to another meeting, which I've forgotten all about. They stacked the meeting. They put Ken Wood, Herb Douglas, Arthur White, and probably others on the committee, because there'd been a lot of talk on the Friday evening at Glacier View that Des could go to Europe. There's talk of him going to the new gallery as an evangelist, because in Europe the investigative judgment was not generally believed, and this actually came from, I won't remember his name, But anyway, I won't dob him in. The next night we met Keith Parmenter outside. This was Sabbath, and he rebuked me, said that people were saying Des had been stripped of his credentials. However, I had not said it like that. I'd done my best to assure Noel of the decent way we'd been treated. I don't think Noel said it. However, things got exaggerated. A lot of people at Glacier View, of course, did not know till next day, but when they did, it sent a shockwave through the camp. Duncan Eva had the sermon that morning and spoke on compassion, a very moving gospel sermon, since he soon retired and wanted the last official sermon to be stated, so no one had any doubts, my guess. Then Elder Wilson gave a very moving prayer, saying how he needed it today, that sermon, since he had such a burden on his heart. He mentioned us and hoped he'd manifested that compassion. The two statements weren't said together. The Holoviacs were both crying, so were the Veltmans, really sobbing. We weren't crying. We must have felt better than everybody else. The Kimes, friends in Auburn who invited us to start Good News later, rang in the afternoon, told me they had talked to Doctors Heppenstall and Hamill separately. It was through Sharon I found out that Heppenstall was very unhappy about Des's stubbornness. Now, Des said to me, Heppenstall, he hadn't done the work Des had in England. And so he was, but essentially he wasn't that far from Des at all. He wasn't that unhappy with Des. And Zane told Dr. Hamill that hundreds and thousands would leave the church. And he is supposed to have said, well, let them, we don't want them. And he said that to me too. I talked to Bob Spangler about it and other things. Kimes also said a lot of other things and felt the week was pre-planned. Well, wasn't that right? Conclusion. On a couple of days' reflection and 2 comments from Duncan Eva and Elder Hamill, it became obvious that the Aussies were pushing it. So we knew that, even back at Glacier View, although we were told it 3 years later by Duncan Eva and Spangler. The board meeting in Australia had already been planned for a week from now. Well, fancy that. The fact that he could say that he and Lance Butler had already discussed the financial aspects also says something, though of course that could have been in case something happened. However, despite the rumours flying around, I only told one Australian, Noel. I told him 3 times, please present it positively. They treated us decently and fairly. I'm not sure they were that fair. As I went back and I saw how they actually fired Des and avoided the consensus statement altogether. That wasn't fair. I have to admit, I don't feel that as confidently now. Bob Parr wrote and said they are supporting the Concerned Layman's Group, and Ron Taylor encouraged an advert for the next Concerned Layman's Group at Vision Valley. Well, here ends my view of Glacier View. Well, that turned out to be the longest tape of all. I may be back because I'm going to go and have a look, not today, but another day, at the Adventist crisis of spiritual identity and see if I had anything different in that. Now, I'm going to prepare the documents. And if you want to contact me at gford, lowercase, the number 1, at bigpond.net.au. I'll be happy to send you the documents that I've used, at least. Yeah, we do have a PDF of the Glacier View manuscript. I'm going to retype this one because it's got some typos in it, being a slight perfectionist. There might be one or two more things. Thank you very much.